Instagram Live. Hey everyone in Instagram Live. Welcome back to Monday Meaning Matters. This is a live session. Here we go. This is a live session, Monday Meeting Matters, that I've been holding each Monday. So I can actually have a conversation with people who have been really experiencing life strongly, deeply. You've been feeling deeply, you've been thinking deeply, and we just want to have a conversation about that. And today I'm going to, let's talk about last week first. If you haven't already gone back to last week's Meaning Matters, where we talked about fuck happiness, give me meaning. In that session, I was mentioning 3 things for why I don't really think happiness is the meaning of life. The first one was that most of our meaningful experiences in life, they're actually not that happy. The second one was, well, meaning makes us play big. It makes us tune into something that is beyond us, that's giving us perspective on why it is we're here. And last, it helps us transcend all of the different uncertainty and all of the things that are happening in our lives. So if you want to know more about that, go back to last week where I edited the word fuck, but it says fuck happiness, give me meaning, and watch that video instead. But this week, I want to talk about 3 myths about meaning. And to be honest, they're not real myths. They're just things that I've noticed that people are reacting to when they ask me what it is I do for a living. And I tell them, well, I work with highly sensitive people. And in the next month, I'm going to be working on something called Meaning Quest, which is to help these people make meaning. And these are some of the reactions that I'm getting. So today I want to talk about why some people have the beliefs that they do about meaning and why we can actually bust that myth. And the first one is that meaning is a luxury. So I've had this conversation recently with somebody I met 2 weekends ago who says, wow, meaning making, that sounds like a luxury. That sounds like navel gazing. Like, I don't think people actually really have time for meaning. And this is where, again, as a coach, I put on my coach hat and compassionately challenge and say, I think meaning is a necessity because a lot of us spend our whole lives trying to find what the meaning of life is, when really the meaning of life is to make meaning of it. And I have a story about a former client that allowed me to share this story, but she needed meaning making. And it wasn't until she was able to see this specific meaning that a really depressing, difficult time in her life made more sense. So she had just gotten fired from a job that she had held for nearly 20 years. It was her first job, and she had climbed the corporate ladders, and she had done really, really well. But the last 2 years of her job, she actually got more and more depressed because she got a new boss, and this boss seemed like an ally at first, but then in every situation she could possibly put her in, she would talk down to this my client. She would make her look stupid. She would shame her for some decisions that she was making. And my client asked to be transferred into another department, and she thought that that would make things better, but it ended up making her feel even more lonely and miserable. And so rather suddenly, in her opinion, her boss came into her office one day and she fired her. So she came to me to kind of figure out, now what do I do? I've been in this career for 20 years. I feel like devastated. I feel betrayed. And I said, okay, cool. Like, tell me about this job. And when she started talking about it, her whole body changed. She looked shriveled. Her face looked like that of a child that was being yelled at. She like kind of hunched her back and her shoulders. And I said, did you really like this job? Yeah, I loved it. Of course I loved it. Your body doesn't really say that you loved it. Tell me more. And so this is when the story came out about what I had mentioned just a second ago to this audience, where her boss was treating her like crap. She didn't really enjoy what she was doing. She was lonely. She felt terrible. And so the meaning finally came out when I asked, so did you really like this job? No, I didn't. Actually, I think I needed to be fired from this job in order to realize that I've been miserable for 2 years. She described herself like the frog in the pot of water, that she's like, I didn't even realize how bad it was. And so suddenly now she can make meaning of, I needed my boss to put me in this position of firing me, which feels like devastated, in order for me to finally leave, because apparently I would have put up with anything. And she realized that she would have put up with even worse if somebody didn't just let her go. So the meeting that she was making with me, it wasn't a luxury, actually. In that moment, it was a necessity. She needed that meaning of, all right, that me being fired was the best possible situation for me. And that's when we were able to move on. Interestingly, I got in touch with her recently, and she's now finally doing something she's wanted to do for her whole life, which is being a designer. And she needed that experience to push her in the direction. And I asked her, does it still offer similar meaning to you? And she mentioned something that will lead me into my second myth busting. She said, Katie, not only is it meaningful to me, but it's even more meaningful to me because I met the person that I was meant to spend the rest of my life with as a result of being unemployed. And so this brings me to myth number 2. Our meaning should be able to change. So the myth is, once you make one kind of meaning, that's the only kind of meaning that you're going to make. And the busting is, no, meaning should change throughout your life, because you're going to look back on the same situation in many different perspectives as your life grows and changes. So I will actually share my story, because I think this is a great example of how meaning can be one thing, change, and then go back to the original thing. Holding meaning making loosely is what I always tell my friends and my clients, is hold on to how you make sense of something. Even if it's a belief system, hold it loosely, because you're going to need it as a foundation to understand, but you don't want to hold on to it so grippingly tight that you're not able to have another understanding or make another meaning of it. So I'll use my climbing Mount Kilimanjaro as an example. It was a 7-day trek. And on day 3, I got immensely sick. I got so sick from the altitude that night we had to sleep in the tent, and I was vomiting profusely. And the guide said to me, no, 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 this is good, this is good. If you get sick on day 3, you'll be able to summit easier than someone who doesn't get sick on day 3. And I was like miserable looking, like, oh, it better be fucking true. It felt terrible. My husband's in the corner. He's not sick at all. And he's like, oh, it's okay, honey, it's okay. Fast forward to the last day of the week when we're supposed to summit. As noted by the guide, my husband, who did not get sick day 3, was in the corner vomiting next to a pile of rocks. And suddenly I felt like I could do it. So it was about a 6-hour hike in the dark from midnight, and you were meant to arrive at the top of the peak at 6 a.m. From about midnight to 4 a.m., I had all of the energy and I was feeling really great. And then from about 4 a.m. on, I started vomiting and I started feeling wobbly and I started feeling like I couldn't do it. But then all of a sudden, I could feel all of these hands pushing me up the mountain and whispering in my ears, you can do this for us, you can do this. And in my state, I felt like it was my entire family, both living and dead, pushing me up this mountain. Like the force of their hands and the force of their energetic support was like undeniable. And it was the only thing pushing me, because I was out of water, I had vomited on my food, and I had zero energy left. And I summited. And I found my husband there, who I was crying tears of joy for making it at the top, and he was crying tears of sadness for being like, I hate this, let's just get down off the mountain. So the meaning that I made shortly after that was that I needed the physical and spiritual energetic support of all of the people behind me to make this. I couldn't have done it on my own, and I needed that. And then 5 years later, that was the meeting that I had held for 5 years. And then 5 years later, I was reading a book and it was talking about the third man effect. And the third man effect is from all of these old explorers like Shackleton, who explored Antarctica, or just like the first climber of Everest. They had described a third man on their trip, which was an invisible entity or an invisible family member who had maybe passed away, but like all of these people had somebody that was there supporting them and like pushing them along on this adventure that they were on. And while I was reading this book, I thought, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. That's exactly what I experienced. And in the book, it had a snippet on like how exhaustion and dehydration and all these things like create this idea of like a third person that's like pushing you, and that, you know, clearly it can't be a real energy or entity. It must be a hallucination of the brain. So in that moment, I was reading that book. I made a new meaning of, oh, maybe that's all it was. Like maybe I didn't really experience, you know, my whole family like pushing me, but whatever. Like it was pretty cool, and like in the moment it felt like that. But okay, maybe it was just this third man effect. So I held that belief for about a year. But later that year, I was on a motorcycle with my husband again, and we kind of had like a wobbly feeling. And all of a sudden, I felt like I had two deceased grandparents behind me, keeping us safe. And they really were like whispering in my ears. And it was probably one of the first clairvoyant experiences with family member ghosts that I had had up until that point, and have had many times since. But once I had that experience, I went back to like the 7 years ago experience of climbing Mount Kilimanjaro and go, no, I think I really did experience my family members behind me. And I used that meaning making again. So meaning isn't permanent. We change it all of the time, and we change it in light of new information, time, different perspectives, different frameworks that we get reintroduced. It's all relevant or all relative, but meaning should not be something you make once and then forget about. Which leads me to the last myth, which is that meaning is religious. The same person that I had a conversation with 2 weeks ago, who said, meaning sounds like such a luxury nowadays. And anyways, I wouldn't make meaning because I'm not that religious. And that's where I had to pause it and make sure that I mentioned in this Meaning Matters video, you don't have to be religious. You can be as secular or as non-believing or as atheist as the next person. It's probably hard to be a nihilist because nothing matters to you, but meaning making is coming from a numinous source. And whether you call that something from a religion or whether you call that something that feels otherworldly, I call it the vertical dimension. Go back and watch the first video to learn what that means. But you're connecting into something that is not your everyday life when you're making meaning. And so it's not like you would describe. One time I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. It was really cool. The end. When you're making meaning, you're finding something that transcends the actual experience, and you're making sense of it from a deeper, more sacred perspective. To be honest, you're touching a mythical realm. This is the realm that Joseph Campbell touched on in all of his work, especially his work around the hero's journey and the monomyth. But what we notice is, as humans, and this is my boy Joseph Campbell as well. So if you like Joseph Campbell, just give me one of these emojis in the Facebook Live. Joseph Campbell would talk about how we're constantly trying to find meaning in every story that we consume, whether it's a story in the Bible or it's a story from a superhero movie. Like all myths, there's some deep, profound lessons in the meanings that we make. And sometimes these meanings are connected to something religious or are connected to a spiritual figure, but many times they're not. I like to say about myths that no myths are true, but all myths are truth. They all represent a universal truth that sometimes we tap into. Like, for example, my client from the very beginning, she was tapping into her boss as a villain, which is also a mythological theme. But once her boss actually fired her and allowed her to become this beautiful new version of herself, she was tapping into the mythological theme of the threshold guardian, who is like the troll under the bridge who won't let you pass until you give them the answers to certain riddles. You're not allowed sometimes to move on in your life until you prove something to the person that's guarding the threshold to the next stage. And she needed to prove to this person that she could find a new meaning, new life, new purpose on the other side of being fired. And so when we look at meaning making, it doesn't matter which religious upbringing or which spiritual or non-spiritual upbringing you're coming from. You're actually touching into the wisdom of your heart and soul, or to the wisdom of something sacred or divine that you have no name for. And this is how we make meaning. And so these are 3 myths about meaning making that hopefully I have busted in some way. And if you are just now kind of coming to terms with what the term meaning even means, you might really enjoy Meaning Quest. And that starts September 17th. And this is a group coaching program that's specifically designed for highly sensitive people or perceptive souls. It's just for women this time around, but I'm hoping more men jump on board and say, hey, that sounds like something that I am. This is a design so that you can actually make meaning of not only 2020 and this crazy shit show of a year, but of your life in general. And we look at it from several different perspectives, from the wisdom of your body, from connecting to 2 wisdoms that are ever present, spirit and soul. And I use those terms, but you may or may not resonate with those words, but they're there. And then also fate and destiny. They're very controversial, fate and destiny, but I believe in them, but I don't think it's what you think it is. And so that is something we discuss. We have 90-minute calls, we have training videos, but we have also a secret group for you to just make sense of everything and like your aha moments and your oh shit challenges. So I will link Meaning Quest in the comments, but as you're watching this video or the replay, feel free to comment any comments or questions that you have about meaning making. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next Monday. If you have an idea or a tip of what you'd like to learn about from meaning making, leave it in the comments. See you then.